My high school ex posted a selfie of us from the reunion, and by morning, my husband had packed his bags. He didn't yell. He didn't even ask if I cheated. He just looked at me like I was someone he didn't recognize, and maybe he was right. Because somewhere between our quiet dinners and my secret texts, I'd become the kind of woman who ruins her own life. For a spark she mistook for fire. David turns his phone toward me and shows the selfie. There's Jared, my high school boyfriend, the one I danced with last night at our 20-year reunion, with his arm around my waist, both of us laughing. David asks if I had fun with Jared, then sets the phone down and grabs his keys. He was gone. 24 hours earlier, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror trying on my third dress. The black one made me look like I was going to a funeral. The blue one had a stain I'd never noticed before, probably from last week's pasta dinner. The red one still fit, barely, but it showed everything I wanted to hide and hid everything I wanted to show. I settled on the black one and spent 40 minutes on my makeup, foundation to cover the exhaustion lines around my eyes, concealer for the dark circles that had become permanent fixtures, mascara to make my eyes look bigger than they felt these days. David barely looked up from his laptop when I said goodbye. He mumbled something about having fun and went back to whatever spreadsheet had captured his attention for the past 3 hours. The reunion was exactly what I expected and nothing like I remembered. The hotel ballroom looked smaller than it had at prom, shabbier. Somehow the decorations were the same cheap streamers and balloons they'd used 20 years ago. Everyone looked older, except for the people who'd clearly had work done, and they looked like expensive versions of their former selves. I grabbed a drink from the cash bar and started the ritual of reading name tags and pretending to remember people I'd forgotten the moment I graduated. Sarah from chemistry looked like she'd aged 40 years instead of 20. Mike from student government had gone completely bald and was trying to hide it with a baseball cap. Jennifer from debate team was talking too loudly about her successful real estate business to anyone who would listen. Then I saw him. Jared looked better than he had any right to after 20 years, same dark hair, though now with distinguished silver at the temples, same crooked smile that had made me dizzy in calculus class. He wore his age well, like a leather jacket that gets better with time. His suit was expensive, tailored, nothing like the thrift store clothes he'd worn in high school when his family couldn't afford better. We found each other across the room the way people do in movies. Except this was real life, and I was married and wearing shapewear that cut off my circulation every time I took a deep breath. He bought me a drink, and we talked for 3 hours straight, about college, about our jobs, about everything except the obvious things hanging in the air between us. He worked in marketing now for some tech company, lived in Portland in a condo overlooking the river, had been divorced for 2 years, no kids. The marriage had been a mistake, he said, with a shrug that suggested it was ancient history. I told him about my job at the insurance company, about David, about our house in the suburbs with its beige walls and predictable mortgage payments. It all sounded so ordinary when I said it out loud, so small and suffocating. He said I looked exactly the same. I knew he was lying, but it felt good anyway. Better than good, it felt like being seen for the first time in years. When the DJ played our old song, some forgotten ballad from senior year that I hadn't heard in a decade, he asked me to dance. His hand on my back felt like a memory I'd been trying to forget. We moved together like we'd never stopped, like the last 20 years had been a commercial break in a movie we'd paused too long. Afterward, he said we should take a picture. I should have said no, should have remembered that I was married, that David was at home probably eating leftover pizza and watching Netflix alone. Instead, I let him pull me close and smiled for his phone. He posted it before I could object, typing the caption with his thumbs while I watched. Still got it after all these years, he wrote, with 3 fire emojis. He walked me to my car in the hotel parking lot. The night air was cool, and I was buzzed from wine and attention and the intoxicating feeling of being wanted again. He kissed my cheek, almost kissed my mouth. I let him get that close. I wanted him too. I drove home with the windows down, feeling like I was 22 again, feeling alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. The suburban streets looked different somehow, less like a trap and more like a choice I'd made and could unmake if I wanted to. Now David's gone, and I'm staring at the bacon burning in the pan. The smell fills the kitchen, acid and bitter, like everything else in my life right now. My phone buzzes. Jared's response, "What's wrong?" I type back, "David saw the picture." So like it means nothing. Like my marriage falling apart is just background noise to his Tuesday morning routine. I turn off the stove and sit at the kitchen table, where David and I eat our quiet dinners every night, where we used to plan our future and now just make grocery lists and discuss which bills are due when. We met at First National Bank 7 years ago. I was 26 and stuck in a job that made me want to scream every morning, filing insurance claims, explaining policy details to people who didn't want to hear them, sitting in a cubicle under fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick and tired. He kept coming in with problems that seemed designed to require multiple visits, a lost debit card one week, questions about his mortgage the next, issues with his online banking that probably could have been solved with a phone call to customer service. It took me 3 months to realize he was manufacturing reasons to see me. He finally asked me out while I was helping him open a savings account. He said he was planning a trip to Europe and wanted to make sure his money was safe while he was gone. Later, after we'd been dating for 6 months, I found out he'd never been anywhere except Florida for a family reunion and had no plans to travel anywhere. He wasn't exciting like the guys I usually dated. He didn't ride a motorcycle or play in a band or have any visible tattoos. He didn't make grand gestures or write poetry or stay up all night talking about philosophy and the meaning of life. He had a steady job at an accounting firm and a reliable Honda Civic and talked about things like retirement funds and homeowners insurance with the enthusiasm most people reserve for sports or movies. But he was kind. Genuinely, consistently kind in a way that felt foreign to me. He remembered that I liked my coffee with 2 sugars and no cream. He listened when I complained about my boss without trying to fix everything or tell me what I should do differently. He made me feel safe in a way I'd never experienced before, like I could trust him with anything and he'd never use it against me. We moved fast, engaged after 8 months, married 6 months after that in a small ceremony at the courthouse because we couldn't afford anything bigger. The house came next, a 3-bedroom colonial in a subdivision called Maple Grove that had no maple trees, just rows of identical houses with postage stamp lawns. Then the mortgage, the joint checking account, the slow realization that safe and happy weren't necessarily the same thing. David saved money while I watched my friends travel to Thailand, start their own businesses, and make mistakes that looked like adventures from the outside. My life became a series of routines that felt more like a prison sentence with each passing day: grocery shopping on Sundays, dinner at 6 sharp, Netflix until bedtime, sex twice a week that felt more like scheduled maintenance than passion. I felt invisible, not just to David but to myself. I looked in mirrors and saw a woman who'd settled, who'd chosen security over possibility, who'd traded her dreams for a 401k and health insurance. When Jared's friend request appeared on my phone 3 months ago, it felt like someone had opened a window in a room I'd forgotten was suffocating me. The messages started innocently enough: comments on old photos from high school, memories about teachers we both hated, jokes about how we'd all aged and changed. Then private messages that lasted longer than they should have. Nothing inappropriate at first, just conversations that stretched through lunch breaks and commutes home. He texted me during my morning coffee, during my afternoon slump, late at night when David was already asleep beside me, breathing steadily like he'd never had an anxious moment in his entire life. Never anything explicit but charged with possibility. Comments about how I looked in old photos, questions about whether I was happy, observations about how much we'd both changed and how much we'd stayed the same. I started deleting the messages after reading them, not because they were incriminating, they weren't, not really, but because they made me feel guilty in a way I didn't want to examine too closely. When David asked why I was always on my phone lately, I accused him of being controlling and possessive. I knew it was unfair, but it was easier than explaining something I didn't understand myself. The truth was, I was already slipping away, one text at a time, one deleted conversation at a time, one small betrayal at a time. Coffee turned into lunch, lunch turned into drinks, drinks turned into his apartment downtown. The building was old brick with hardwood floors and windows that actually opened, everything my suburban house wasn't. The first time felt like an accident. We were talking about old times, and suddenly we were kissing, and then we weren't talking at all. His hands remembered things about my body that I'd forgotten myself. I told myself it was just physical, just scratching an itch I'd been ignoring for years, but I kept going back. I wore my ring and told myself that meant something, that as long as I kept wearing it, I wasn't really betraying anything important. But deep down, I knew I was already leaving my marriage one afternoon at a time. He made me feel alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. I clung to that feeling even when everything else started to rot around me. 5 times in 3 weeks, I became an expert at lying, at deleting browser histories, at explaining away the unexplainable. Working late became my favorite excuse because David worked late himself sometimes and never questioned it. I'd sit across from David at dinner wearing my wedding ring and make conversation about his day while thinking about Jared's mouth on my neck. I'd kiss David goodnight and wonder if he could taste the deception on my lips, if he could smell another man's cologne in my hair. I told myself I was being careful, that what David didn't know couldn't hurt him, that I deserved to feel wanted, to feel alive, to feel like more than just half of a boring married couple sleepwalking through suburbia. The lies became second nature: working late, drinks with girlfriends who didn't exist, shopping trips that never produced any bags. I rehearsed my stories in the car, practiced my innocent face in bathroom mirrors at work. I convinced myself this was freedom, that I was finally living instead of just existing, that I was taking control of my own happiness instead of waiting for David to notice that I was dying inside our perfect little life. It wasn't freedom. It was falling, and I was too intoxicated by the rush to realize how far I'd already dropped. Jared started pushing for more. He wanted to know why I was still pretending my marriage was real, why I kept going home to a man I clearly didn't love anymore, why I was wasting time on someone who didn't appreciate what he had. I stopped pushing him away when he said things like that. I stopped defending David. I stopped explaining why leaving wasn't that simple. I stopped pretending that my marriage was worth saving. He made me feel electric, like every nerve ending had been asleep for years and was finally waking up. Like I was a person worth wanting instead of just a wife worth keeping. I started taking bigger risks, longer absences, weaker excuses, careless touches that lingered too long when David wasn't looking. I missed my dentist appointment to meet Jared for lunch. I left the book club early to spend an hour in his bed. I bought new underwear and hid it in the bottom of my drawer like contraband, like evidence of a crime I was planning to commit. The affair consumed me, not just the physical part but the planning, the sneaking, the constant mental chess game of keeping my story straight. It was exhausting and exhilarating, and I felt more alive than I had in years. I thought I was getting away with it. I thought I was smarter than every other cheating spouse who'd ever been caught. I thought I could keep both lives running parallel forever, taking what I needed from each without either one collapsing. I was wrong. Jared wanted more. He kept asking why I was still pretending my marriage mattered. Why was I wasting time with David when we could be together for real? I stopped pushing him away. I started missing appointments, leaving the house at odd hours, making up conferences and emergencies that required me to be somewhere else. My lies became second nature. Each one came easier than the last. Each betrayal felt smaller than the one before. I convinced myself this was freedom, but it wasn't. It was destruction disguised as liberation. When he texted me late at night, I responded immediately, even with David sleeping beside me. When he wanted to see me during lunch, I made excuses to leave work early. When he suggested weekend trips, I invented family obligations and work conferences. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, someone who could compartmentalize deception like it was just another skill to master. Late at night, Jared texted, "Miss you already." My husband lay next to me asleep, one arm thrown over his pillow. I should have ignored the message, turned my phone face down, and gone to sleep. Instead, I typed back, "Miss you too." In the morning, I heard David on the phone with someone in his office. His voice was quiet, but I caught fragments through the bathroom door while I was brushing my teeth, screenshots, evidence, my name spoken with disbelief instead of love. I knew it was over before he even confronted me. The way he looked at me over breakfast, like he was seeing me clearly for the first time in months, like he was looking at a stranger who'd been wearing his wife's face. I rushed to Jared's apartment in a panic, practicing explanations that sounded hollow even to me. I told him everything, that David knew, that my marriage was over, that I didn't know what to do next. He was distant, annoyed, like I was interrupting something more important. He shrugged and, "Now I was free, right?" Like it was that simple. 7 years of marriage could be dismissed with a casual comment over his morning coffee. Free. The word hung in the air between us like a question I wasn't ready to answer. I said I hadn't wanted this to happen, that I'd never meant for everything to fall apart, that I just wanted to feel alive again, not destroy my entire life. He laughed, actually laughed, and said my marriage had been dead for years anyway, that David was boring and I deserved better, that I was just too scared to admit it, that this was the best thing that could have happened to me. I looked around his apartment with fresh eyes, takeout boxes stacked on the counter, dust gathering on shelves that held nothing but empty beer bottles, nowhere to sit except his unmade bed or a chair that belonged in a college dorm room. The walls were bare except for a poster of some band I'd never heard of. This wasn't a home, it was a waiting room for someone who'd never learned how to build anything real. For the first time, I saw Jared clearly. He wasn't offering me a future, he'd never been a real option. He was just an escape hatch I'd used to blow up my life, a fantasy I'd confused with reality, a temporary high I'd mistaken for love. And now even that door was closing. He was already looking at his phone, scrolling through messages from other women, probably. I could see it in his face. I was excited yesterday, and he was ready for tomorrow. I went back home one last time to face David, my hands shaking as I turned the key in the lock. He was sitting at our kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a stack of papers I recognized as bank statements and mortgage documents, legal papers too, probably. His face was calm, but I could see the exhaustion around his eyes, the way his shoulders sagged like he'd been carrying something heavy for too long. We spoke, really spoke, maybe for the first time in years. The words came slowly, painfully, like pulling splinters from infected wounds. I admitted everything. About Jared, about the affair, about the 5 times I'd slept with someone who wasn't him, about how I'd felt invisible in our marriage, like I was disappearing one grocery list at a time, about the messages and the lies, and the way I'd convinced myself I deserved to feel wanted. I didn't try to soften it or make excuses or blame him for not paying enough attention to me. He didn't yell, didn't throw things or demand to know why, or call me the names I probably deserved. He just sat there nodding like he'd been waiting for this conversation for months, like he'd already grieved for our marriage and was just waiting for me to catch up. When I finished, he said I didn't live there anymore, not angry, just factual, like he was telling me the weather or the time or any other simple truth. I tried to say sorry, but the words felt empty and too late. He'd already turned away, looking out the window at the neighbor's yard where nothing had changed and nothing ever would. He walked upstairs, and I heard our bedroom door close with a soft click that sounded final, like the period at the end of a sentence I'd been writing for months without realizing it. I packed one suitcase with clothes and toiletries, moving through our bedroom like a ghost haunting her own life. Everything looked smaller than I remembered. The bed where we'd made love and talked about our future and gradually stopped doing both. The dresser where I'd hidden the new underwear I'd bought for another man. The mirror where I'd practiced lying to my husband's face. I left my wedding ring on the kitchen counter next to the key to our front door. The ring looked smaller than I remembered, less significant, just a circle of metal that had once meant everything and now meant nothing at all. The house felt like a museum of a life I'd thrown away. Photos of happier times when we'd believed in forever. Furniture we'd picked out together at stores I'd thought were boring. Dreams we'd shared and abandoned without either of us noticing when they died. I walked out carrying everything I had left in one bag, past the garden David had planted last spring, past the mailbox with both our names still painted on it in cheerful yellow letters. My sister let me stay on her couch while I figured out what came next. The first night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, scrolling through my phone looking for messages that weren't there. Nothing from Jared, nothing from David. Blocked on social media, blocked on text, blocked from the life I'd spent 7 years building and 3 weeks destroying. I stared at that selfie still posted on Jared's page, with its stupid caption and meaningless comments from people who didn't know they were looking at the moment my marriage ended. The comments were all fire emojis and looking good and couple goals from people who thought they were seeing old friends reconnecting, not watching a woman blow up her entire life for a fantasy. I was alone, not metaphorically, not poetically, actually alone, sleeping on my sister's couch with nowhere to go and no one to blame but myself. I realized the selfie wasn't harmless. It was a trigger, a loaded gun I'd pointed at my own life and pulled the trigger without thinking about the consequences. And now everything is gone, my marriage, my home, my future, my sense of who I was, all for what? A few hours of feeling wanted by a man who'd never seen me as anything more than a temporary distraction from his own emptiness. Sometimes the smallest betrayal is enough to end everything. The next morning, I called my lawyer. David had already retained one, a sharp woman in a power suit who specialized in divorce cases where adultery was involved. My lawyer was cheaper, newer, and kept apologizing for things that weren't his fault. The division of assets was straightforward. We'd only been married 7 years, had no children, and I'd forfeited any claim to sympathy when I decided to sleep.